Hello there and welcome back to another video. It's been a little over 1 month since I put out a super short video where I put an Intel Arc A750 into my main system, and after about a month of using it, I've got some things to say on it. I know that this 30-day Arc challenge thing has been done many times before, but I've got a different opinion on the card than what I've heard from pretty much all other people who have done this, so you might want to stick around to hear that. I bought this Intel Arc A750 8GB card for $210 right at the end of August. At $210 on the brand new market, it's competing with something like AMD's Radeon RX 6600. I don't have a 6600 to test, and I can't afford to pick one up for the sake of this video, so if you're wanting to compare the performance of these two similarly priced cards, you'll have to outsource the 6600's numbers. I'll be doing my best to run pretty standard benchmarks here on the 750 though, so that those of you who wish to compare it in terms of performance per dollar can do so. I play all of my games at 2560 by 1440 resolution, which is probably a bit higher than what this card is really intended to be run at considering the 8GB of VRAM. However, the performance it was able to deliver still impressed me significantly. Additionally, the testing of this card will not be limited to just games, as what I've learned while using it, and I'll stress this point more later, this is truly an incredible card for a lot of productivity work. I'll be talking about how well it performs in both video editing and 3D CAD, as well as how it performs when it comes to games in this video. The games I've decided to test this card in are as follows: Forza Horizon 5, Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, Satisfactory, Hitman 3, Halo, the Master Chief Collection, more specifically Halo Reach, Halo Infinite, and Minecraft. This testing suite is designed to have a range of different graphics APIs to test the A750 in multiple different scenarios. Other creators and reviewers have mentioned that these Intel graphics cards seem to struggle when it comes to playing older games that use older rendering APIs, so I'll make sure to test that here. There are 4 DirectX 12 titles, which the Arc should perform best in, 2 DirectX 11 titles, and 1 OpenGL title. I don't have any good titles that are older than DirectX 11/OpenGL, so I can't really test that, but I hope that for now this is an acceptable test bed. I'll also make sure to be testing this card with some ray tracing in the titles that support it, as from what I've seen, it performs quite impressively. And one more additional note before I get on with the benchmarks here, as this does affect performance quite massively, the testing system is running an Intel Core i9-11900K at 5.1 GHz on all cores with 32 GB of DDR4 3200 MHz CL16 RAM, and a resizable bar is enabled. Starting out this testing suite with Forza Horizon 5, which is a DirectX 12 title. The Arc A750 puts up quite an impressive showing at 1440p high with 4x MSAA and short motion blur. An average frame rate of 86.7 FPS with 1% and 0.1% lows of 74.1 and 2.7 FPS respectively. At 1440p high, this card does great in Forza Horizon 5. The 0.1% low number here is quite intriguing to me though. At the end of the benchmark, no matter how many times I reran it to ensure it wasn't a spike caused by Windows or some other program, there was always one big stutter that causes this 0.1% low. Throughout gameplay and during the rest of the benchmark though, this card didn't behave like that, and this 0.1% low doesn't feel entirely representative of the real experience. That's great and all, however, Horizon 5 does support ray tracing, so let's take a look at the ray tracing benchmarks in this title. Using all the same settings as before, however this time with ray tracing set to high, the A750 put out an average frame rate of 86.3 FPS. That's an interesting one for certain. Generally, turning on ray tracing in a game causes you to lose several frames, but in this case, we only lose less than 1 whole frame per second. Even after retesting this because of how off the result looked to me, I was continually presented with the same negligible performance decrease. Good job on that one, Intel. Additionally, the 1% and especially 0.1% lows increased with RT on, becoming 74.8 FPS and 57.3 FPS. With a great showing in Forza Horizon 5, which is quite an optimized title, let's hit it with something that's both a little heavier and a little newer. Moving on to Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, and the A750 is still shredding it in this DX12 title. At 1440p high, without any ray tracing or upscaling, the 750 managed an average frame rate of 95.1 FPS with a 1% low of 36.9 and a 0.1% low of 20.8. For such a modern title, at 1440p high on an 8GB card for roughly $200, that's quite incredible performance in my opinion. Just like Forza though, Spider-Man Remastered supports ray tracing. And, unlike Forza, ray tracing in this game makes a pretty noticeable visual difference due to the amount of glass on buildings and especially skyscrapers. With the same settings as before, but this time with all of the ray tracing options turned on, the A750 definitely loses a noteworthy amount of its performance. The average frame rate dropped down to 72.6 FPS, which is still really impressive, but a lot less than 95.1. The 1% and 0.1% lows dropped as well, down to 30.4 and 19.6 FPS respectively. Still, quite a good showing from the Intel Arc in this title. And the fact that it maintains an average of well above 60 FPS means that this game feels great to play even with high settings at 1440p with ray tracing turned on. Throwing in Satisfactory as a benchmark at 1440p high settings, there's no ray tracing in this title, so there won't be a ray trace test here. And one notable thing is that with the Intel Arc installed in my system, I am unable to select any other graphics API from within the game other than DirectX 11. That may possibly be noteworthy for someone out there. It's not too big a deal for me, although I find the fact that DirectX 12, which is implemented in this game, isn't an option with this card, as it should be able to perform better than it would running DirectX 11. In any case, with 1440p high settings in a relatively built-out world, the A750 averages 115.4 FPS with a 72.9 FPS 1% low and a 2.3 FPS 0.1% low, which is entirely the game's fault. Satisfactory is just a stuttery game as you load new portions of the world, so the 0.1% low shouldn't be taken with too much seriousness here. I've played a notable amount of this game recently for the sake of testing this graphics card, and it's been great throughout mostly all of it. I say mostly because there was one issue that I ran into here. A hard crash about 6 hours into a session of the game running non-stop. This crash wasn't due to anything such as overheating, and I found it quite weird. I can't say that I haven't had hard crashes on both modern NVIDIA and AMD GPUs though, so I didn't think too much of it until it happened once more while playing Halo Infinite. This is where I need to bring up the first, and I use quotes when saying this here, major issue with this card. The Intel Arc control software didn't see driver updates that were needed after a Windows update, which is what caused this crashing problem. Updating the drivers by downloading the latest ones from Intel's site fixed the issue and went just fine. However, when checking from within the Arc software package whether or not the drivers were up to date, it said that they were up to date when they really weren't. Just something to keep in mind. Seems like a small issue that should be fixed with relative speed, but certainly worth mentioning. Next up is Hitman 3, a DirectX 12 title that I've discovered to have ray tracing that is the most brutal thing I've ever run on a graphics card. You'll see what I mean by that here soon in the benchmarks. Firstly, however, I must go through the benchmarks for the regular 1440p high settings test without any ray tracing. The A750 put up a pretty good fight while pushing out 79.9 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 44.3 FPS and a 0.1% low of 5.1 FPS. There were only a few larger stutters, but that 0.1% low number does demonstrate how the experience wasn't the smoothest I've ever seen. I bet that a large portion of these stutters can be attributed to lack of VRAM though, due to the fact that I'm running the game at 1440p on an 8GB card. Now it's time to hit this card in its face with a brick, Hitman 3's ray tracing. With all ray tracing enabled, it's time to run the Dartmoor benchmark one more time, and boy oh boy, it did not like that. An average frame rate of 19.2 FPS with 1% and 0.1% lows of 6.7 and 5.1 FPS, I would not call that playable. 1440p high settings with all ray tracing enabled, the only kind of ray tracing that actually makes a noticeable visual difference in this game to me, on this card is just not a good idea. I'm certain one could get a better experience, around 30 to maybe 40 FPS if they were to run the game at 1080p and maybe use a mix of high and medium settings, but in reality, ray tracing in Hitman 3 is overall a pretty bad idea. I've used a 3060 Ti before, and if I recall correctly, at 1080p high with ray tracing, it averaged about 40 FPS. Probably not a setting that many people should enable in this game, especially not on this card. Next up is Halo Reach and Halo the Master Chief Collection. This is a pretty old game, but the Master Chief Collection runs in DirectX 11, so I had hope that maybe the Arc card wouldn't have the kind of performance issues that it does in older games that run in DX9 or 10. Well, that hope was really short-lived. With an average frame rate of 33.9 FPS at 1440p high, remember this is an Xbox 360 game, I don't even need to mention the percentile lows to tell you it's not a good experience. This is a known issue that appears to have been reported to Intel a few times in only the past 3-ish months, so hopefully a fix will make its way out soon. This is really a shame for me as I love these older Halo games, and the fact that this GPU struggles with all of them, not just Reach, is quite a bummer. I would expect a fix for this soon, but we'll have to see. Sadly, this experience is the only thing that's going to push me to remove the card from my system and go back to 6950 XT. But once more, I hope it will be fixed soon. Time for the final DirectX 12 title in my small testing suite, Halo Infinite's campaign. As I've mentioned in previous videos, Halo Infinite's campaign and multiplayer are two entirely different beasts to run. There was no point in testing the online multiplayer though because of the performance offered in campaign, which is the one that's much harder to run. I've played some of the online multiplayer and have had no performance issues in it, so again, I'll just be testing campaign. In the campaign, at 1440p high settings and no ray tracing, the A750 put out an average of 84.1 FPS. This is a pretty good performance considering just how difficult Infinite's campaign can be to run, so I'm quite pleased with it. Percentile lows were also fine, with a 1% low of 68 FPS and a 0.1% low of 16.6 FPS. Performance in the campaign was absolutely playable and was overall a pretty great experience. Notably, however, I couldn't seem to find the ray tracing option in the video settings. I could swear that I've seen it there before with my AMD graphics card installed. Whether or not I'm just blind, the feature's been removed, or if it's something with the Arc GPU are all things I'm unsure of, but it should be mentioned that I just couldn't find the ray trace sun shadows option. And finally, the last title, Vanilla Minecraft 1.20.2. Definitely an uncommon game to make it into benchmarks because of how terribly optimized and inconsistent performance in this game is, but the reason that I put it here is because it still utilizes the OpenGL graphics API, which is quite old, being released in 1992. OpenGL still hasn't fully died yet though, and for that reason, it's worthwhile to test at least one program that uses it. In Minecraft, the average frame rate was 130.3 FPS with pretty terrible percent lows with a 1% low of 40 FPS and a 0.1% low of 22.6 FPS. Although these percentile lows just seem to come with Minecraft no matter what graphics card you have. You could have a 4090 and still get these stutters, so I just wouldn't pay too much attention to them here. Compared to other graphics cards that I've tested in Minecraft, the A750 didn't seem to perform any differently in regard to weird slowdowns or stutters, which is really what I was looking for here in terms of OpenGL drivers and all that. Quite an impressive showing from a graphics card that costs a mere $210 brand new running games at 1440p with only 8GB of VRAM. I don't have a similar caliber card at this price point to compare to in terms of frames per dollar, but I can say that for what's practically $200, I'm very pleased with the performance in all the games it works correctly in. Halo Master Chief Collection is still messed up. Hopefully that gets fixed sooner rather than later, but it is certainly a bummer for me because I love those older Halo games. Moving onward to the productivity tests, which are where I think this card really shines. In this video, I'll talk about its performance in DaVinci Resolve 18 as well as Fusion 360 and Ultimaker Cura. These are my three most utilized productivity programs that notably benefit from a powerful discrete graphics card, which is why I'm testing them. Starting out with the 3D modeling programs, as neither of them are that interesting. Both Ultimaker Cura and Fusion 360 ran just fine on the A750. Fusion had no issues rendering the CAD designs that I threw at it on the A750, and Cura was also just fine. The layer view on more complex models was still a bit stuttery, but this is an old version of Cura, and it seems to be more of a software limit in the way that Cura is programmed, as opposed to the Arc GPU giving it problems. Moving on to what I think to be a much more interesting productivity workload that this graphics card absolutely shines in, DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is the editor that I use for all of my videos, and on my normal graphics card, which is a 6950 XT, it definitely doesn't do the best it can. For whatever reason, the Resolve doesn't seem to be able to understand exactly how to utilize the AMD graphics card that's available to it, and therefore it falls back very heavily on the CPU. After installing the Intel Arc into my system and updating DaVinci Resolve as it wasn't having a fun time with the Arc at first, I noticed that the Arc was thrashing my 6950 XT to death. I genuinely love the way that this card performs in video editing, and the only minor drawback is the 8GB of VRAM because DaVinci Resolve loves itself some RAM and VRAM. I've never had any issues running the A750 in Resolve, and the performance it offers with editing combined with the export performance, more on that in a bit, makes me truly hesitant to take it out of my system for just the sake of video editing. As of writing this script, and I presume editing this video, I haven't removed the card from my system because of how great it is for editing. Having AV1 available is truly a godsend as well. Shortened upload times, smaller file sizes, and my system being able to use the GPU to encode instead of falling back to CPU encoding is awesome. To export my I paid $80 for another broken Dell Precision 3420 Let's Fix It video, should totally check that out if it's not the video that brought you to my channel by the way, at 4K 30 FPS in AV1 using mostly the default DaVinci Resolve settings, it took a little less than a mere 5 minutes. If you can't tell by the way that I've been talking about this card's performance in video editing, I adore it and think it's a great choice for this kind of productivity work. Especially its AV1 support is just a giant selling point out there for many people who deal with video. Considering that outside of Arc, the only way to get AV1 is either through an NVIDIA RTX 40 series graphics card, which all seem to be quite expensive for what they are, or an AMD RX 7000 series card such as the 7600, the $210 A750 with a great AV1 encoder and very respectable performance in other tasks is really compelling. Alright, that's enough ranting about video editing and how awesome this card is at it. At the start of this video, I mentioned that I have a different opinion of the Arc cards than a lot of other creators. I personally think that the general consensus of it's a great card if you're tech savvy and alright with having problems to solve constantly was valid for a while, but as the card has matured, I started to disagree with that statement. After using this card for a little past a month now without any severe issues, with the exception of the Master Chief Collection performance, it's been rock solid. It's still got minor growing pains here and there, namely the issues with the Halo Master Chief Collection, but overall, performance and stability in all of my other tasks hasn't given me so much as a minor hiccup. For $210, or I guess $216.99 right now, it's not a good card for tech-savvy people looking for an adventure. No, it's a good card for someone who's got $210 to $220 to spend on a brand new graphics card. There are two small caveats that do need to be mentioned though. I stand by my claim unless you are one of two people. One, someone with a system that doesn't have resizable bar support. If that's you, buy a 6600 instead, because the Arc will not perform good for you. And two, if you're a person who plays retro games very often, or if they're the only games you play, and you're not willing to wait to see if a driver update may fix some weird performance issues on them, you should also probably buy a 6600. Those are the only two exceptions I've managed to come up with though, after my testing here. In conclusion, the Intel Arc A750 and by relation almost certainly the A770 are cards that I think are awesome options for many people. Gaming and especially productivity do great on this card, but especially productivity. If you're like me and use your computer mainly for creating, designing, editing, anything like that, and play games when you have a bit of free time, the A750 is pretty much a perfect fit. What I want this video to portray to you guys is how I believe the 750 is no longer just a card for the technically inclined, but is now instead a great option for people who need a graphics card at this price point that's capable of impressive performance. If you disagree with my opinion on this card, I'd love to hear your point of view on it in the comments below. I hope that all of you were able to at least enjoy this video, and maybe even learn a thing or two. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.